Testing 1, 2, 3, and we're live. Hey, Jared, how are you doing?
Mary Ellen, I'm great. I'm excited about today's conversation.
So am I. I think it's definitely one that could ruffle some feathers, but also one that's incredibly important and quite, I think, core to a lot of the things we do as a church. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. If you've seen it looks like you're about to say something, Jared.
I was just going to say, just before we jump into today's conversation, I don't know if you had planned to plug anything or let anyone know anything, but one announcement that we have is Wayne Boehm. He's the head of Hope Channel in the South Pacific region. He sort of asked me, we've got this survey that we're filling out, and it's on our Record Facebook page. And I think it closes either today or very soon. And he'd like a lot of people to fill that survey out so that the Adventist church and its Hope Channel, I guess, gets a representation in that survey. I filled out the survey the other day. I don't watch Hope Channel very much, I will admit. I will confess that. I'm not an avid Hope Channel watcher, but I do think it's important to let people know how people are thinking about or feeling about Adventist media products so that the church has a better information on and can go forward, creating things for the church members. So if you're interested,
I'll post that link in the comments.
Throw a link on the comments. So yeah, that one's for you, Wayne. He asked me to give that a shout out. So I just thought I'd jump in and do that before we got into our conversation proper.
Awesome. One other thing I should mention before we introduce our special guest for today is that it's the Adventist record offering coming up in a couple of weeks. And this morning we released our little promo video starring the man himself, Jared Stuckeroth, and his beautiful family. So
I don't know about starring, Mary Ellen. I just followed the script that I was given and did what I was told.
Yes.
But it's turned out nicely. It was my wife's acting debut. She had a line. She was given a line to say, so that will be exciting.
I think she was the only person with a line, actually, which was cool. But yeah, basically we crashed your daughter's birthday party, so thank you again for that. And if you guys are interested in watching, just scroll down a couple of posts on our Facebook page, and it's right there, and it's also on YouTube and Vimeo. So check it out. Other than that...
And support the record offering.
And support the record offering on May 8th in 3 weeks' time, 3 Sabbaths' time. Well, jumping into today's topic, we have a very special guest, Pastor Wayne Krause, who is the leader of Mission to the Cities for the South Pacific Division. So, Wayne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Great to be here with you guys.
It's great to have you. Now, tell me, did I get your title correct? Sometimes I get a little confused because I know you do a lot of things. So if you'd just like to summarize what it is that you do at the SPD, that'd be great.
My boss would probably like to hear that too. I'm part of the discipleship team that looks after discipleship for the whole South Pacific Division. I also head up specifically Mission to the Cities, which is how do we reach and make disciples of secular, post-Christian people, mainly in our cities. We have more people moving into Sydney and Melbourne every year than the entire Adventist Church membership of Australia and New Zealand. So, that's the area that I'm passionate about. I love seeing people who are far from God and seeing the lights go on when they discover the love of Jesus and for them and become lifelong disciples. So that's what I do.
Amazing. Oh, so rewarding. It must be very, very exciting in your role. Do you get to see a lot of conversion stories sort of face to face? Are you in it?
Well, I've my background as a pastor is in planting churches and and we used to say we exist for those not here yet. So designing things so that of someone who knows nothing about the Bible, nothing about Christianity, can walk in or be part of our community from day one. So yes, I've seen lots of those conversion stories. I've seen those people who are very proud of being atheists, accept Jesus Christ, to get baptized and become part of the church. I've seen that number of times, and it's just a fantastic joy. I've also, and I still do, have my office I have an office down at the South Pacific Division, but I also have one in the coffee shop in my local shopping centre, so I can keep my feet on the ground type of thing.
Love it.
That's very cool. So you're not just a theoretical guy, you're still a practitioner. You're still trying to live out some of those principles of church planting, meeting people.
I think it's a responsibility of everyone who claims to be a follower of Christ to be a disciple maker. And there's no use me sitting in an office somewhere telling other people what to do if I'm not involved in that myself.
So, Wayne, what we wanted to sort of chat about today, I guess, is sort of a tangent to what it is that you do. But I think it'll be interesting getting your perspective on it. And the topic is foot washing. Now, this will bring up all kinds of emotional responses on various ends of the spectrum. Some people love it and they get, connection with God and each other really deeply. And other people will run to the hills and just won't come to church that Sabbath because it's a bit awkward, And I guess from your perspective, as an overview, before we dive into sort of the topic at hand, I'd be interested to know sort of what attitudes you've seen towards it and what attitudes, like what camps people typically sit in either ends of the spectrum.
And maybe what is it first, Wayne, just in case we have people who aren't from our tradition, our faith tradition, watching this and like foot washing. Isn't that what you do in the shower?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think if it's going to happen, you need to explain it properly. And the practice starts in the Bible, John chapter 13. Jesus comes to his disciples, and normally in those days, if you went into a home, their servant or slave would wash your feet. It was a humiliating thing that they had to do, but that was their job. And Jesus had come in with their disciples. They didn't have a servant there, but none of the disciples were going to wash someone else's feet. They weren't going to humble themselves that way. And Jesus comes along, and while they're arguing amongst themselves about who's the greatest, Jesus comes down, kneels down, and he washes each of their feet. And then he comes along, and there's a passage of scripture that actually says, you don't understand what I've done to you. You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I've done to you. So it's from that basis that the Seventh Adventist Church does foot washing. Now, we are the only major denomination that does do foot washing as a regular part of their, if you like, sacraments. Other individual groups do it, but we are the largest denomination that does it.
I didn't know
and it's
that.
fairly
That's
clear there, the biblical injunction. Jesus says, do this for other people. So it's a fairly clear sort of thing. But I guess a lot of people, going back to Mary Ellen's attitudes questions, I grew up in the church, and as a kid, the kids didn't take part in foot washing, right? So we had a children's story while all the adults went out. They split gender appropriately and left the main building, and us kids just sat and we had a children's story. And I found myself, in that, I guess, that twilight zone between adulthood and childhood. And I would like to consider myself an adult in many ways and situations, but I was very keen to stay on for the children's story. It felt very alien and awkward to sort of go out and join the adults for foot washing. I preferred to hide in the sanctuary and stay in that space. And so there was this sort of, maybe, I don't know, tension for me about that scenario, this fear that I had of taking part in that part of the sacrament, as you called it. So
yeah, it was also kind of slightly embarrassing too, because there was always some who didn't go out to do the foot washing. So there were always some left in the church, kind of looking at each other, kind of going, "Are you a bad person too?" Or, "Is there some sin that you haven't confessed?" Or that's quite embarrassing. You could always tell the weekends that this was going to happen on, because in the Seventh Adventist Church it normally happens 4 times a year, and the only reason it happens 4 times a year is that's when the Methodists did it, and we got it from them.
Okay.
that's the only reason, as a full foot washing, and then the bread and the wine, as we call communion, happen 4 times a year. The only reason is because that's what the Methodists did, and some of our pioneers were Methodists.
Mm. And it's interesting, Wayne, I guess, that we're looking at that history, and I haven't sort of thought about this before. You mentioned that we're the largest denomination to do that, but I know a lot of the mainstream denominations do communion or the Eucharist or the bread and the wine every week.
Yeah.
So they do it at every service or every mass that they attend, and yet we have it less often than that, because the foot washing is a bit of a logistical sort of nightmare. It's not just passing around a little piece of bread and wine. You've got to fill up buckets and get towels for everybody and that sort of thing. So I guess that means that's also a practical reason we do it less frequently, I suppose, once a quarter rather than every week as such.
Yes. Yeah, I think, Jared, it's really interesting to think what it must have looked like in the 1st, 2nd century of the church and the whole meaning behind it. If you can think about it, the churches were not allowed to own property. So it was all in home churches, or we've discovered now more and more in courtyards and things like that. Now, in the courtyards of villas and things like that, guilds used to meet there as well, and they were male only. So the woodworking guild, the clay making guild, all those sorts of things would have their ceremonies there. But with the Christians, there were men, women, children, and slaves. And so as people went past, they would see people sharing a meal together, and they'd look, and there's slaves sitting next to their slave owners, and then they would watch as the slave owner knelt down and washed his slave's feet. And the people going past going, what on earth is this? That these people are community, these people are equal. And that was a huge deal about what Jesus was trying to say. So the essence behind foot washing is no one here is more important than anyone else. And in Christ, we're all equal. And there is no other ceremony, there is no other ritual, if you like, that we do as Christians that demonstrates that. Even the bread and the wine is us and God. The foot washing is us with our fellow community, or inviting someone else to be part of that community.
Well, that pretty much does it for today, folks. I think we'll... Well, my next question was going to be, so, given the contextual differences in today's day and age, we typically don't have the slave and master kind of a hierarchy in our homes and things like that. Yes, we do have sort of hierarchies, but they're a lot more nuanced, I think. But then I guess my question was going to be, does that do away the need for foot washing? But now you're saying that it's the only sort of sacrament or thing that we have that that demonstrates that. But surely this practice sort of it puts people on the outer. It not rejects, what's the word? Like, people find it awkward, right? So is that a reason to keep doing it? If people find it awkward, should we be like, oh, okay, well, obviously it's a barrier for you, so we shouldn't do that?
Yeah, when you and I kind of talked about this before, and you sent me and said, hey, would you be willing to talk about this? It's the first time I've really actually sat down and thought about the experiences I've had, and I've realized that the people who had the most problem were Adventists and Christians of other denominations. The people who had the least problem with it were totally unchurched post-Christian people, because when you said, you don't start by saying we're now going to take part in the service of humility, that doesn't really work well. You actually say we're going to take part of something that shows that every one of us is equal. And if you're sitting in a church, and that's my experience of spot the Adventists, I love that, because you don't know. So you have the drug addict sitting there, and you have the prostitute sitting there, and you see the elder of the church go over to the drug addict and say, do you mind if I wash your feet? And after I had explained and said, this is a service, I want you to tell you that we are a community here. No one is better than the other. I'm the pastor, but I am no more a minister than you are. This is something that we do to demonstrate to other people and to us that we are equal. And the drug addict sitting there going, yeah, right. And then the elder or the pastor comes over to them and says, would you give me the honor of allowing me to wash your feet?
Yeah.
And I have not had an unchurched secular person say no to that. I have had an atheist say, I don't believe in God, but I always come to this service. I don't know why, he said. Maybe it's the spirit that brings me. And I'm going, hang on, you just said you don't believe in God, and you're saying the spirit brought you. But every time we have this service, they would turn up.
Amazing.
They say that familiarity breeds contempt, Wayne. Do you think that there's an element of that we don't explain at each service and it's not a special event, it's sort of, oh, there's that again, and we sort of maybe treat it with less dignity and even humility than we should? Yeah.
I agree very much with that. We treat it like a ritual that we have to do every now and then. And we make it a special service, and sometimes we hope they're not going to put a full-length sermon on the end of all this, along with all this as well. But to me, the times I've seen it where it's most effective is at weddings, where a husband, newly married husband, kneels down and washes his wife's feet as part of the wedding ceremony, and the wife washes husband's feet. And basically, so Marilyn, you just got married, so you missed out on that bit. Okay, but it was that we are equal, and I want to serve you. I want to be your minister. I want to be able to serve you. And they start their marriage that way. And if we explained it like that, I think it would take on a lot more meaning and not be so ritualistic. I
was going to say, in addition to that, the most sort of powerful experiences of foot washing in my adult life have been at our church's sort of couples conferences, where we have washed as a couple. We've washed one another's feet, my wife and I. And there is an element of, it's that humility, but there's also an element of reconciliation that makes it very powerful, because it's very hard to wash someone's feet who you've just been having some conflict with. You know, some of these conferences bring up some deep sort of ideas or thoughts or tension points, and then to have the opportunity to pray with your spouse before or after, or both, while washing their feet, and just getting down in front of them and kneeling there and, you know, doing that process. It's a symbolic sort of, most people have showered that morning and have worn socks and shoes, and their feet aren't dirty. You know, it's not sandals coming in from the desert. It's sort of, there's no real purpose to the washing except that symbolic nature of it. But that has really impacted me at different times in my life, being able to do that for my wife, because it's like, it's a process of bringing closeness, prayer for each other, and service to one another. I think, it really highlights for me some of those elements.
Yeah, it does. It also, it's that closeness that, you know, if there are some barriers, can I break those down? But it's also the realization for me as I'm washing someone's feet is to be thinking, do I actually think I am better than somebody else? When I talk to the waitress, when I talk to the gardener, when I talk to different people, do I treat them differently to my work colleague or someone in a business suit? And I have to say that I often do. And this service that we do gives me a reality check. On, hey, Wayne, you know, you're not as hot as you think you are. You know, Jesus died for this guy. You're washing his feet, and is as important as you are. Don't get any of your tickets on yourself too much.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reminder. I think what you said about the way that we frame it is true for a lot of things in our Christian faith. I think sometimes we lose the meaning just because we kind of are forgetful as humans, and we need reminding all the time about the significance of things like this.
You almost think that might be why God said, let's do it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Touche. We have some questions here from our audience. Thanks, guys, for sending them in. Josh Wood, he sends quite a large one, so I'm not sure how much of the screen it's going to take up. Quite a bit. It says, I understood the 4 times per year, not just from a logistical perspective, but also from the perspective that foot washing is supposed to be a time you humble yourself and seek to make right any wrongs and wash the feet of those you have wronged. But then he says, with this in mind, the question in my mind is, are we only doing this 4 times a year because we don't want to have to humble ourselves more often? I think that's an interesting question. I don't know if you've got any reflections on that. Are we not wanting to humble ourselves?
I think it's purely a logistical issue with how much time it takes. I do believe that foot washing should happen. It doesn't have to happen just with the bread and the wine. And in actual fact, where it's mentioned in John, the bread and the wine is not mentioned. Okay, it's just this part. So I believe it can happen in homes, small groups, the events that you talked about, Jared, all places, and I think we should be doing it a lot more than we are. I think his comment is very wise. The inconvenience, it's just the logistics, I think, and it's a custom.
Yeah.
There's no theological reason or anything like that. And I hope it's not because, hey, I can only humble myself 4 times a year. Anything more than that is a stretch. I hope it's a lot better than that.
Yeah. Diego Vasquez also says, question for Wayne, have we lost the meaning of foot washing because it's not a modern day practice? And I guess tacking on to the end of that, is there an alternative that is more modern that doesn't involve the foot? Like, is there an alternative, or has Jesus hit the nail on the head again and this is it?
Yeah, I think it's okay if you can come up with something else. I think if you explain it properly what it meant back then, and then ask the question, and we're doing this because of what it meant back then, but are there lessons from that we can have today? I can't think off the top of my head a kind of custom that we could do, and I'd be interested if the questioner does, that would do the same thing. I like the fact that Jesus, the creator of the universe, kneels down and washes dusty feet, wants his followers to do it so that in the future, that men and women don't think they're better than each other, that slaves and free don't think they're better than each other, that parents don't think they're better than the children, those sorts of things. Yeah, I'd be interested to know of anything else. I do like the idea of this is what the ancients did, this is why they did it. Can we learn from that for today?
Perhaps we can sanitize each other's hands as we enter the...
Now, that would be an interesting idea, wouldn't it?
Well, I guess that sort of brings us to another point that I think, Jared, you raised as we were brainstorming this. COVID. Do you think this will continue going forward? Because COVID has certainly thrown a spanner in the works in many areas, and this is certainly one of them.
Well, I don't know if foot washing is COVID appropriate, so I don't know if churches have been doing it. And yeah, if you're watching and you have done it in the past year or so, I imagine with so many people out of church, it hasn't been done for a while.
Yeah, some have done it in their homes. And so I've known online, someone will do it, and husbands and wives and children, families have done it in their individual homes. I do believe in the future it will happen. Human touch is so important. I mean, I still have had some massages done, but I have to admit that when they came to my feet, they put on gloves. So I don't know what the future holds, but I think the issue of human touch is something we should try and hang on to. I do want to say this, though. I have a pastor friend of mine who I've known for many years who can't stand foot washing because he is extremely ticklish.
Okay.
And so whenever anyone touches his feet, it is agony. And here's a pastor will crack up laughing because they're lightly rubbing his feet. They're tickling him to death, and it is absolute torture. So he does not look forward to foot washing.
It sort of diminishes the dignity of the ritual, doesn't it? When you can't stop laughing. Well, do people have, what can we do for people who either have some hang-ups about their feet? Maybe they've got a wart or a corn or a melded together toes or something. Or what can we do for those who are, I guess, extreme introverts among us and just, or have had some kind of, I'm just thinking on the fly here, trauma or something, and they don't like physical touch. Like, can we make the service inclusive for those who struggle, you know, rather than being left in the church with the children? How can we implement ways to be more inclusive and more accepting of people that may really have an issue with someone else touching them or just their feet or something like that?
And because of issues of abuse or anything like that in the past, it can be a real issue. And I do think that in cases like that, definitely don't try and force them. Don't talk to them about the honor it is for me to be allowed to wash their feet. Okay, you know, in Jesus' day, they were covered in manure and dust and dirt from the road because they had open sandals type or bare feet, and it would be an honor and a privilege, you know. But if they go, no, I don't want, I would not push it at all. It is a voluntary thing, and it is ultimately between them and God, and that's the important thing.
I find it so fascinating that in your experience, church planting and, you know, interacting with non-Adventists, non-Christians, that it tends to be the Adventists and the people that you wouldn't expect to have a problem with it that do have a problem with it, whereas others are very open to it. That's opposite to what I would have expected. My question is, like, going on from that, I guess maybe not directly on topic, but given your experience, what are some of the traditions or practices or things that Adventists do that do turn people off from our denomination? Have you seen things that are not liked?
Look, I have to say that the easiest, if you want to know the answer to that, the easiest thing is to walk into a church, any church, on a Saturday, Sabbath morning, and ask yourself, if I knew nothing about Christianity and I'd never seen a Bible before, would I understand what was going on here? You know, the God is good all the time. You know, what is this, a kind of a secret handshake type thing? You've immediately said there's an in crowd and an out crowd. Happy Sabbath. What? You've never heard of Sabbath, and someone greets you with Happy Sabbath. Is this a secret handshake again? We do that. Let's everyone turn in the Bible to this. Well, they don't have Bibles. They don't know how to turn. You go, everyone knows the story about this. Well, no, they don't. And so, to me, there is a lot of insensitivity in our churches for the pastor to be able to say, okay, I'm going to pretend that every person sitting here has never seen a Bible before.
Wow. Yeah.
Has never heard of Jesus Christ. And I'm going to talk to them about the gospel. I'm going to go to Bible passages, which you will, but you're going to explain everything in context. I have seen so many embarrassing situations where people have said, oh, stand up. If you're a visitor, please stand up. Well, I don't want to stand up. I don't even know why I'm here. And now you're signaling me out in a group. Let's pray in a circle. Good night. You know, how to scare somebody off. Let's pray in a circle. If you don't want to pray, that's okay. Just nudge the person next to you. I've done that. And within 3 seconds, I've got the tap on my shoulder. It went right round the circle. No one wanted to pray. But if there's someone there who doesn't want to pray, don't read in a circle. Anyway, don't get me started, because this is a pet of mine and I could go on forever. But yes, There are a lot of things we do that I think turn people off Christianity and us as Adventists, because we have our own language and our own happy way of doing things.
Yeah, and it's very important to recognize that, because we're looking to make those people who aren't comfortable. But on the flip side of that, in your experience, what about the positive things that we underestimate? You've opened my eyes to, I guess, foot washing and how it can be used, and how other people may find it attractive, that this thing that we find, oh, this is cringeworthy, you know. Are there any other sort of beliefs or understandings or practices that the Adventists have that you think, hey, those are actually attractive and we should be either leveraging those more, or just be aware that, hey, this is not something to be ashamed over. This is something that outsiders actually find beautiful or attractive?
Yeah, I could name a couple of things right off the bat. The surveys in Australia and New Zealand have shown in the cities, two of the biggest issues is the church's attitude to sexuality, the whole LGBTQ issue. We as Adventists are not good in that space. The other second, one of the high ones as well, is the view of hell. How can a loving God, John Piper, well-known evangelical, has come out as no longer a Christian, and he'll post on his Instagram post, and straight away, how can you believe in hell and then go to a restaurant and have barbecue? You know, he's joking about it, but he's got hundreds of thousands of people already flocking to him, because, and we can say, hey, yeah, we don't believe in a God like that either. The whole issue of health, a diet. I think we've missed the boat. We've gone the health route when we come to vegetarianism, when most of the unchurched people I know are vegan or vegetarian because of environment and cruelty towards animals. And that's a whole area we haven't really entered into. So to me, those beliefs that we as Adventists, it's not unique to us, but they're two of our big ones, are real positive and something we can be proud of. I love talking to somebody who goes, I cannot believe in a God that would burn people forever. And I go, neither would I. What? So, yeah, they're two of the things, Jared, Marilyn, that I think are very important that we could be highlighting. Oh, by the way, the Sabbath ain't bad either. The whole concept of rest and balance and family and getting your whole life in order, that's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. It seems as though we have a communication issue more than anything else. And what you're saying, you know, the jargon that we use in churches, and the fact that we're not telling people enough about our hell doctrine and our vegetarianism and all of this stuff. I think it's for me, this is my takeaway. It's like, we need to communicate better with people. And I guess, how do we do that? Is that a corporate thing? Is that an individual thing? You know, because often I feel like if you're doing it as an individual, you're almost fighting the higher levels. Not necessarily, but it's not a clear message.
Yeah, it's a corporate level. That's why you guys are in trouble, because that's what you're part of. So you need to be doing it. But it's primarily, it's got to happen at the individual level. We are not good at listening. We want to knock on doors and we want to give our testimony or something or other. Good grief. Why can't we just listen to their story? And I'm not talking about once. You spend hours listening to them, and then you find out how your story fits with their story. So to me, one of the huge thing is we need to get out there and just be with people and just be friendly, show them that we're actually, well, relatively normal, and the peculiar people bit only applies to some of us. So
none of our viewers, of course, Wayne.
No, I would never.
We have a comment here from Diego, who adds that human rights and advocating for the unprivileged is an area we could probably do a lot more. And I think that, definitely.
Yeah, yes, got it. Dead right.
Josh Wood, a little while ago, I think it was related to the foot washing conversation, but I think it's still relevant. He says, are we not using inclusive language because subconsciously we recognize people are not likely to be at church for the first time because of some of these ill-explained practices?
Yeah, that's true. It's dead right. But you've got to start somewhere. And I would suggest that even if you know every person, if you're meeting in a house church, if you're meeting in a building, just pretend that there are unchurched people sitting there. And if you do that enough, and if you practice that enough with people who are, Adventists, then I think actually God will send them. Why should he send people now?
Yeah.
Because it's actually almost spiritual abuse for God to bring people to some of our churches. Okay. And why does God want people to be spiritually abused?
Well,
that's another topic.
Inoculation against the gospel. It's like giving them a little bit of bad theology or bad understanding or something they're uncomfortable with, and it turns them away from the rest of the core of the message.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. Well, that was a tweet if I ever heard one. I'll just take that little later on Instagram and
take credit for it. Yeah, I stole it from somewhere. I don't know where. So
love it. Well,
you're right. Wayne, you did right, Wayne. I just, I wrote an editorial about hell a little while ago, and I shared it on my Facebook page for that reason, because I thought there's people out here talking about this at the moment. It was sort of going on Twitter at the moment with some of these evangelicals in America. And I had an Adventist friend who approached me for more information. They weren't 100% clear on what Adventists did believe in the doctrine. So as you say, even if you know every person in the room and you know their pedigree and they've been there for 3 generations, it doesn't mean that everyone in our community is as aware of everything and why we do it, as they just sort of blend in. You find kids that get to high school and don't know how to read, and no one's ever picked it up because they are hiding the fact that they don't always understand what's going on. And I think in our churches, we have to acknowledge that there's maybe some people sitting in our congregations who aren't the full bottle on everything. They're not 100% aware of how it works or why, or they're there for whatever reason. And we've got to be loving of those people. And to do that, we have to, as you say, listen. We have to be inclusive. We have to explain well and not assume that people know.
Using language they understanding, not our cliches.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people, probably 50% of people my age that I sit in Sabbath school with, they don't know a lot of the Bible stories or a lot of the religious jargon that we throw around. And it's so excluding of them. And it's actually made me very grateful, because I went to an Adventist school. I went to a church growing up. I always went to Sabbath school. For a lot of people, they didn't have that, but we expect that everyone did. So even for the people in our churches already, it's a problem, I think.
And you can do it without them making them feel dumb. You've got to acknowledge, accept. If you're here for the very first time and you're not really sure why you're here, and you've got some serious issues with Christianity because some Christians have said some nasty things about you, I'm talking to you because I have some Bible texts that you can use against Christians like that. And so my sermon comes from Colossians 3 on how we should be treating other people. And the whole back row sits up. Okay, I've got some texts I'm going to be able to use against those Bible bashers that are hitting me. So I believe in that you should acknowledge and respect the fact that they're there. Don't make jokes about people who believe in evolution. Don't make jokes about atheists. I mean, they're not dumb people. And we do our God disservice when we do so.
I think we also glorify intelligence a little bit too much as well. We not only put down people that are not like us for being dumb, but we glorify intelligence in our churches. But Wayne, we've only got a few minutes left. And one thing we like to do at Record is get practical. So, we've already been practical, but just like a really practical take-home message. What are your top 3 tips for, I guess, fostering health? This is a very big question. And now that I think about it, what are your top 3 tips for fostering healthier churches? We've talked about communication, we've talked about not excluding people, but as a summary, what would you say to the average churchgoer who feels like their church just isn't cutting it in this space?
Wow. The top 3 for a person to do is, I'd say, number 1, next time you're in church, pretend that you are a totally unchurched person.
Yeah.
And observe, and then go, okay, what simple things could we change so that my friends who don't know anything about Jesus Christ wouldn't be able to be here. My second one would be to listen to people. Listen to your friends, and don't be too quick to correct them. Don't be too quick to give them the answers. We want churches that our young people can grow up knowing they can ask any question they like, and they will be respected and won't be put down. The safest place to be able to ask questions should be church. So that's one, was go to church, look around and see what's happening. Number 2, learn to listen. Number 3 to me is, in each service, acknowledge the fact that there could well be people there who are not sure why they should be there, and we are glad they're there. If you don't believe everything we teach here, doesn't matter. We're just glad you're here. If you're a person who has serious questions about God and you're here, we're just glad you're here. There are 3 things I would do. There's a whole stack of them, but they are 3 things that I think would be very helpful in the average church.
Amazing.
And going back, Wayne, to, I guess, where we started this conversation with foot washing, and I guess the idea of humility. There may be some people who are listening who are very uncomfortable with the idea of not providing the answers that they have. You know, we have this end time message, the 3 angels message, that we have to warn the world, you know, we have to put those things out. And it's sort of a push or a challenge for some people, like, hey, but I have to be doing this. I'm called. Can you just talk to that tension in case there's people watching that are like, you know, uncomfortable with what you're saying and how to present ourselves to those people? Can we hold those 2 things in tension? Because often they're painted as mutually exclusive. Some people will say, you have to be loving, you have to be inclusive, you have to be open. And other people will say, well, you're compromising your beliefs, you're not preaching the 3 angels, you're not. How do we hold those things together? Because I'd like to think that we can as Adventists.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the biggest challenges I have when you're preaching. How do you preach to a person who's never opened a Bible before, to some dear saint who's been in the church 40 years and spiritually is way ahead of you? One of my favorite books is a book called Jesus is the Question. And it lists the 360-something questions Jesus asked. And it also gives the 3 answers he gave. There's a bit of argument. Some say there's up to 10 answers Jesus gave, but he asked over 360 questions. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a ratio when you're in a conversation, how much talking you should be doing and how much listening you should be doing, and asking the right questions. I think that's hugely important. And by the way, you know, you can give answers, but give them a sandwich. You don't have to give them a loaf in the first time you're together. Sometimes we think someone asks a little question. I think it's always better to answer in a way that they're always wanting more, rather than you give them an answer and they go, whoa, a question again. They're going to get to me for the next hour and a half. So yeah, we've got to give the truth and what have you. But boy, I have never converted somebody, and the Holy Spirit, I have never been involved in converting somebody where it was a debate.
Yeah.
And I won. Right? And I could go, I won. Not one of those people I ever did with that accepted Jesus Christ. But people I built a relationship with, answered and listened to, they are the ones who said, man, I want to be part of this community.
Wow.
Does that help at all, Jared? Did I miss
I think so. Yeah, look, I'm on board with what you're saying. I acknowledge that some people I'd like to help us all to wrestle with that a bit better, and to have the humility to go, we've got some great answers. I think our Adventist worldview is a beautiful one. It explains many things. And I pick up on your points about the Sabbath and vegetarianism and things like that. I think to some extent as Adventists, we've started to lose some of those things, or lose our passion for them, whereas the world's embracing those things. The world is talking about Sabbath. The world is looking at plant-based diets to help, as you said, the planet, and to help. And all those things have kernels in our worldview. We can talk about the environmental aspect that you mentioned. It's there in the Bible. It's there in our favor, but we don't necessarily look at it that because we haven't in the past.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, I'd say the best books on how to keep Sabbath at the moment are not being written by Seventh-day Adventists. They've been written by people, some of them not even Christians, but of saying this is what the ancients used to do, and this is what we need to do to recalibrate our lives. And the whole issue of looking after creation because of the Creator, looking after justice and everything like that, all these elements of the Sabbath are being missed. The other thing, Jared, is I believe firmly that God calls us to make disciples of Jesus Christ. So it's not where to, and we've got it right. It is primarily a relationship. And if my discussion with somebody does not draw them closer to Jesus Christ, then I'm doing it wrong. That's my number one priority. Introduce them to Jesus Christ and becoming a disciple, and the teachings usually come to relationship.
Absolutely. Well, there was definitely some incredible nuggets of wisdom in there. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts on foot washing, and also on just church culture and church life in general. And we really, really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Jared, are there any?
I was just going to say, hopefully those watching and ourselves, we can take a new appreciation for foot washing into our life, and look at using it as a mission, as an outreach tool. If there are visitors in our church, or if we're in a small group or a home group, maybe introducing that element in some way to our rituals that we practice as Christians. Because it's not the sort of thing we often do at a small group, Wayne. We do it 4 times a year at our main corporate worship service, but we don't do it in our groups, whereas maybe, as you're suggesting, that's a more intimate setting where it might fly well. So I think we've got some good practical take-home tips. And it certainly opened my eyes or refreshed my appreciation for foot washing.
That's good. I'm glad.
Well, thanks again, Wayne, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you again in our broadcast next week. Until then, God bless.